You're listening to Midnight Whispers Stories. This channel is dedicated to true psychological horror, calm, realistic stories designed for focused listening and deep immersion. If you enjoy horror stories that rely on atmosphere, silence, and the slow loss of certainty, subscribe to Midnight Whispers Stories. Subscribers get uninterrupted long-form stories, a consistent atmosphere, and new releases every day, so you always have something immersive to return to. Story 1. Lights were on. I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw the gas station. It was 3 a.m. on a stretch of Nevada highways so empty it felt like driving through the end of the world. My phone had died an hour back. The fuel gauge needle kissed empty. Then, like a mirage in all that darkness, I saw lights blazing ahead. Brilliant, almost blinding white lights flooding out across the desert scrub. A gas station. Open. At least, it looked open. I pulled in, tires crunching over gravel. And it's when the wrongness started creeping in. Every light was on. Fluorescents screaming inside the building. Floodlights drowning the pumps. Even the neon beer signs in the windows glowing full brightness. But nothing moved. Not a single shadow crossed those windows. No attendant visible at the counter. No other cars, just me, my dying truck, and this island of light in the middle of absolute nowhere. I sat there for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the building. The doors were definitely unlocked. I could see one hanging slightly ajar, swaying just barely in the night wind. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, find another station, risk running out of gas on the highway. But I had maybe 5 miles left in the tank. Maybe the pumps were old, the kind that needed you to pay inside first. I had no choice. I stepped out into air so cold it burned my lungs. The desert night was silent except for the hum of electricity. That sound pressed against my ears. Constant and unnatural. Fluorescent tubes buzzing like a swarm of insects trapped in glass. I walked toward the entrance, my footsteps too loud, and pushed the door open wider. A bell should have chimed. It didn't. The door just swung open with a long, quiet creak. Inside, everything looked normal at first. Rows of chips and candy bars. A coffee station with a full pot sitting on the burner. Steam rising from the carafe. Hot dogs rotating slowly under a heat lamp, their skin glistening with grease. A radio on the counter played country music at low volume, some song about lost love and empty highways. But nobody was there. I called out. My voice sounded small and wrong in all that brightness. No response. I walked up to the counter, looked behind it. Nothing. No attendant. No sign anyone had been there recently, except that coffee was fresh and those hot dogs were still hot. The cash register sat open. Drawer pulled out. Bills visible inside. 20s and 50s just sitting there, waiting. My heart started beating harder. This wasn't too right. Place is done to just get abandoned mid-shift with everything on and money sitting in the open. I looked around for a back room, a bathroom, anywhere someone might be. There was a door behind the counter marked employees only, hanging half open. I should have left right then, paid for my gas somehow, or just driven until the truck died and dealt with it in daylight. But fear does strange things to logic. I needed to understand what I was seeing, needed to know I wasn't losing my mind out here in the dark. I went through that door. The back room was small, lit by a single bulb. Boxes of inventory stacked against walls. A tiny desk with a schedule pinned to corkboard, shifts written in fading ink. And a smell, faint but unmistakable, copper and something spoiled. The door to the bathroom stood open just a crack. Light spilled through. I pushed it wider with one finger, not wanting to touch anything more than necessary. Empty, but the mirror was fogged up like someone had just taken a hot shower. In a gas station bathroom, at 3 a.m. Condensation dripped down the glass in slow rivulets, and written in the fog, in unsteady letters, were 2 words, lights on. My stomach dropped. I backed out of the bathroom, out of the back room, suddenly desperate to be out of this place. But as I came back into the main store, I noticed something I had missed before. The security camera above the counter was on. A little red light blinked steadily, recording, and beneath it, a monitor showed a live feed split into 4 views. The pumps outside, the front entrance, the store interior, and the back room I had just left. On the screen showing the store interior, I could see myself standing there. But I could also see something else. Behind me in the feed, reflected in the glass door of the beer cooler, was a figure. Dark, motionless, standing right behind where I was. I spun around. Nothing there, Just shelves and refrigerator cases in harsh white light. I looked back at the monitor. The figure was gone from the screen now too, but my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold them still. I ran for the entrance. The bell that hadn't chimed when I entered suddenly rang out, sharp and violent, as I burst through. I sprinted for my truck, fumbled for keys, and that is when I saw them. Footprints in the dust around my vehicle. Fresh prints, bare feet. They circled my truck completely, over and over in a tight spiral, and then led away toward the back of the building, toward the darkness beyond the floodlights, as if someone had walked around and around my truck while I was inside, studying it, and then simply walked off into the night. I got in, started the engine on the third try, and floored it back onto the highway without bothering about gas. The fuel gauge showed empty, but I didn't care. I watched the gas station shrink in my rearview mirror, that impossible island of light, and as I watched, the lights began going out. One by one, floodlights first, then the interior fluorescents, then the neon signs, until only darkness remained. My truck rolled to a stop about 3 miles down the highway, out of gas just like I knew it would. I sat there in the silent desert, in my dead vehicle, waiting for dawn. Terrifying as that wait was, it felt safer than going back. When the sun finally came up, I flagged down a highway patrol car. The officer was skeptical of my story but agreed to drive me back to the station with a gas can. We drove that stretch of highway twice. The officer even pulled up the GPS coordinates I remembered. There was no gas station, just empty desert, not even ruins or a foundation. Nothing but sand and scrub brush and the highway cutting through it all. The officer looked at me like I was crazy or on drugs. Maybe both. He gave me enough gas to reach the next town and told me to get some sleep. I didn't tell him about the thing I found in my truck bed later that morning when I finally made it to a motel. A coffee cup from that gas station. Still half full, still warm. Now I drive during daylight hours only, and I never stop at stations where the lights are on but nobody is inside. Because waiting there feels worse than leaving, and sometimes in those places, something waits with you. They say some buildings hold on to moments of horror, play them over and over like recordings. I think that station is one of them. Still there, maybe in some fold between what is real and what shouldn't be. Lights blazing, doors unlocked, coffee fresh, waiting for someone to stop. Story 2. Receipt that printed late. I never believed in coincidences until that receipt printed itself at 3 in the morning on an empty highway in Nevada. And by then it was already too late to turn back. The gas station appeared out of nowhere, which should have been my first warning. I had been driving for 6 hours straight through the desert darkness, fighting to keep my eyes open, when the fuel light blinked on. My phone showed no signal, no nearby towns, nothing but endless black highways stretching into the void. Then suddenly, there it was, a single island of fluorescent light bleeding into the darkness like a wound. The place looked abandoned. Ancient pumps stood like metal sentinels, their numbers frozen in analog time. No cars, no attendant visible through the grimy windows of the small building. Just flickering lights casting long, disturbing shadows across cracked pavement. But my tank was nearly empty, and the next town could be 50 miles away. I had no choice. The air felt wrong when I stepped out. Too still, too quiet. Desert nights are never truly silent. There are always insects, wind, distant animal sounds. But here, nothing. Just the electric hum of the lights overhead, buzzing like angry wasps trapped in glass. The temperature had dropped dramatically, and my breath came out in visible clouds, which made no sense for Nevada in September. I slid my credit card into the pump. The screen flickered, displaying text that seemed somehow outdated, like technology from decades ago. The authorization took longer than it should have. Much longer. I stood there in that eerie silence, watching the darkness beyond the light, feeling increasingly certain that something was watching me back. The shadows seemed too dark, too thick, as if they possessed actual weight and substance. Finally, the pump clicked on. I filled my tank, the mechanical numbers rolling over with painful slowness. Every few seconds I glanced at the building, looking for movement, for any sign of life. The windows reflected only darkness and my own pale face staring back, distorted in the dirty glass. When the pump automatically stopped, I felt relief wash over me. I just wanted to leave this creepy place and get back on the road. I replaced the nozzle. The screen went dark. Transaction complete. I turned toward my car, keys already in hand. That's when I heard it. The mechanical grinding of the receipt printer, loud in the suffocating silence. I froze. I hadn't to press the receipt button. I never did. Everything was digital now. Emailed confirmations. No need for paper. But the machine was printing anyway. The paper emerging slowly, deliberately, like a tongue extending from a metal mouth. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to get in my car and drive. But curiosity, that terrible human weakness, made me turn back. Made me reach for that receipt with hands that had begun to tremble for reasons I couldn't yet explain. The paper felt wrong, too thick, too cold, like touching something that had been buried underground for years. I held it up to the flickering light, and my blood turned to ice. It wasn't the gas receipt. It was a list of names. 23 names, printed in that old dot matrix style. The letters slightly faded as if the printer was running out of ink. But what made my heart hammer against my ribs was the realization that I recognized some of these names. Michael Torres, a guy the first went to high school with who died in a car accident 5 years ago. Jennifer Harlow, my neighbor who disappeared without a trace last winter. David Chen, a coworker who committed suicide last month. Dead people. The receipt was listing dead people. And at the bottom, in darker ink, fresher somehow, was my own name. Robert Matthews. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the paper. This had to be a joke, some sick prank, except nobody knew I would be here. I hadn't planned this route. I'd taken a wrong turn hours ago, gotten lost, ended up on this forgotten highway by pure chance. Or what I thought was chance. I looked up at the building, and this time I saw movement. A shadow passing behind the window, too quick, too fluid to be human. The fluorescent lights began flickering faster, strobing, turning everything into a nightmare of stuttering images. And in those brief flashes of darkness between the light, I saw them. Figures standing at the edge of the illuminated area. 23 figures, I somehow knew without counting. Just standing there in the darkness, perfectly still, watching me. Every time the lights went out, they were closer. Terror finally broke through my paralysis. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, my breath coming in panicked gasps. The receipt fluttered in my shaking hand as I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming the lock down. I jammed the key in the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, then nothing but clicking. No. I had just filled the tank. The car had been running perfectly, but now it was dead. And those figures were moving closer in the darkness, visible only in the brief moments when the lights cut out. Each flash of blackness brought them nearer to my car. I could see more details now. Their clothes were wrong, outdated, from different eras. And their faces, oh God, their faces were too pale, too blank, like masks of skin stretched over nothing. I tried the ignition again. Just clicking. The lights inside the car began to flicker in rhythm with the station lights. And in my rearview mirror I saw one of the figures now standing directly behind my car. A woman in a dress from the 1960s. Her head tilted at an impossible angle, and her mouth was moving, whispering something I couldn't to hear but felt vibrating through the metal of the car. The receipt in my hand suddenly felt hot, burning hot. I looked down and watched in horror as new text began printing itself across the bottom of the paper, letters appearing one by one as if an invisible typewriter was adding a message. Every name stopped here. My mind raced, trying to make sense of this nightmare. This gas station. It was a trap. A collector. Every person on that list had stopped here, alone, in the dark, and none of them had ever left. The station fed on something, drew people in through impossible convenience, through desperate need. And then, what? What happened to them? I looked through the windshield at the building, and this time I saw inside clearly despite the grime and darkness. The interior was filled with them. Dozens, maybe hundreds of figures, all standing perfectly still, all staring out at me with empty eyes. The small space seemed impossibly vast, extending back into shadows that shouldn't to exist in a building that size. And I understood then, they weren't ghosts. They were still here, still trapped. The station had taken something vital from them, left them as hollow shells wandering this pocket of darkness forever. The figure behind my car pressed her face against the rear window. Up close, I could see the horror of what she'd become. Her skin was translucent, showing shadows moving underneath like fish beneath ice. Her eyes were completely black, and her mouth stretched too wide, revealing row after row of teeth that looked like they'd been filed to points. The other figures had surrounded my car now, They pressed against every window, their cold fingers leaving smears on the glass. Some were recent. I recognized David Chen, still wearing the same tie he'd worn on his last day at work. Others were decades old, their clothing rotting, their bodies showing signs of decay that should have been impossible if they were still moving. I tried my phone. No signal, but the screen glowed in the darkness, and in its light I saw something I'd missed before. A small card tucked into the sun visor. I pulled it down with trembling fingers. It was yellowed with age, the edges crumbling, but the text was still legible. Last stop gas station, established 1952. Where every journey ends. Where every journey ends. Not continues, ends. The receipt burned hotter in my hand. More text was appearing, faster now, covering the entire paper with words that made my sanity crumble. You stopped. You filled. You took the receipt. The contract is sealed. Contract. The word sent fresh waves of fear through me. By taking gas, by accepting the receipt, you agreed to something. Some terrible bargain I had. He understood. The station gave travelers what they needed. Fuel, rest, relief. And in return, it took everything else. The figures began moving in unison, their hands scraping against the metal and glass of my car, creating a sound like nails on a chalkboard amplified 1,000 times. The noise drilled into my skull, and I realized with mounting horror that they were trying to get inside my head. Not just my car. In desperation, I tried the ignition one more time. The engine coughed, sputtered, and impossibly, it caught. The roar of the motor seemed to drive the figures back for just a moment, and I didn't waste it. I slammed the car into gear and stomped on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, tires screaming. I felt impacts as I drove through the crowd of figures, their bodies offering no resistance, like driving through smoke. But in my mirrors, I could see them turning, following, their movements becoming faster, more desperate. I rocketed out of the pool of light and into the darkness of the highway, my headlights carving a tunnel through the black. Behind me, the gas station lights grew smaller, dimmer. But I could still see the figures standing at the edge of the light, watching me escape. Except I wasn't escaping. Not really, because the receipt was still in my hand, and it was still hot, still printing. And I couldn't make myself let go of it. New words kept appearing, burning themselves into the paper and into my mind. You can drive. You can run. But the contract remains. When your tank empties, you will return. I looked at my fuel gauge in terror. 3/4 full. I had maybe 200 miles before I need gas again. 200 miles to find another station, to escape this nightmare. But something deep in my gut told me the truth. There would be no other stations. The road ahead would be empty, endless, until my tank ran dry and I had no choice but to return. Or worse, every station I found from now on would be the same one. The last stop, the place where every journey ends. I'm still driving. The sun came up hours ago, and the highway looks normal now, other cars passing me, regular rest stops and towns appearing on signs. But I haven't stopped for gas. My gauge is below a quarter tank now, the warning light blinking its patient rhythm, and I know what is coming. Because 20 minutes ago, I saw it ahead on the road. That same gas station, with its ancient pumps and flickering lights, visible even in broad daylight. I drove past it, didn't stop, but in my mirror I saw all 23 figures standing in front, waiting. And when I looked down, the receipt had printed one final line. See you soon, Robert. My tank is almost empty now. The engine is starting to sputter. And up ahead, maybe 5 miles down this empty stretch of highway, I can see those lights again, calling me home. Calling me back to take my place among the others who stopped there, who made the same mistake, who became permanent residents of that terrible place. I am going to run out of gas in about 3 minutes. And when I do, there is only one station for 100 miles in any direction. The same station, the only station that matters now, the last stop where every journey ends. And mine is about to. If these stories hold your attention, that's exactly what this channel is built for. Midnight Whispers Stories focuses on uninterrupted, long-form psychological horror with a consistent atmosphere. Subscribing means you always know where to return when you want stories that don't rush and don't let go easily. Story 3, Truck That Never Turned Off. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. Some sounds become part of you. They crawl inside your head and make a home there. And no matter how far you drive or how loud you scream, you can never get them out. The sound of that truck engine is still with me, right now, even as I am telling you this. A low, constant rumble that shouldn't to exist anymore, but does, somewhere in the back of my skull, idling forever. It started 3 weeks ago at a rest stop off Interstate 40 in New Mexico. Middle of nowhere, the kind of place that exists purely as a pause between destinations, where the fluorescent lights hum like dying insects and the vending machines offer food that expired during the previous administration. I'd been driving for 11 hours straight, hauling freight from Albuquerque to Flagstaff, and my eyes felt like someone had rubbed them with sandpaper. The dashboard clock read 2:37 in the morning. The parking lot was nearly empty. Just my rig, a couple of sedans, and a single pickup truck parked at the far end under a broken streetlight. An old Ford, maybe 70s vintage, painted that faded blue that every truck from that era seemed to wear. Nothing special about it, nothing that should have caught my attention. But the engine was running. I noticed it the moment I stepped out of my cab. That particular diesel rumble, steady and deep, the sound every trucker knows by heart. The kind of sound that becomes white noise after a while, except this one didn't fade into the background. It stayed sharp, present, like it was demanding to be heard. I walked across the lot toward the rest stop building, my boots echoing on the asphalt. The night air was cold and dry, carrying that distinct desert smell of dust and creosote. Above me, the stars looked close enough to touch, scattered across the sky in thick clusters that you never see near cities. Beautiful and empty and infinite, the truck kept running. Inside the rest stop, the fluorescent lights made everything look sick and yellow. A single clerk stood behind the counter, a kid maybe 20 years old, staring at his phone with the glazed expression of someone who checked out of reality hours ago. I grabbed coffee from the dispenser. It smelled like burnt plastic, but I drank it anyway, needing the caffeine more than I needed dignity. Busy night? I asked the clerk. He glanced up, barely registering my presence. Dead, same as always. That blue Ford out there, I said, gesturing toward the window. Engine, it's been running since I got here. Driver inside? The kid looked confused for a moment, then shook his head. No idea, man. Wasn't there when my shift started at midnight. I paid for my coffee and a bag of chips that tasted like cardboard and walked back outside. The truck was still running, still idling in that same steady rhythm, never changing, never varying. I could see my breath in the cold air now, little clouds that dissolved into nothing. Something felt wrong. I am not the kind of person who believes in intuition or gut feelings or any of that supernatural nonsense. I deal in schedules and deadlines and the concrete reality of moving freight from point A to point B, but standing in that parking lot, listening to that engine drone on and on, I felt something crawling up my spine. A primal warning that lives deeper than thought, the same instinct that kept our ancestors alive when they heard rustling in the dark. I walked toward the truck. The closer I got, the louder the engine became, until it filled my ears completely. A mechanical heartbeat that never skipped, never faltered. The kind of consistency that should have been reassuring but wasn't. Through the driver's side window, I could see the interior was empty. No keys in the ignition. No driver. Just worn vinyl seats and a cracked dashboard and shadows. No keys, but the engine was running. I tried the door handle. Locked. I walked around to the passenger side, my shadows stretching long and distorted under the broken streetlight. That side was locked too. The truck bed was empty except for a layer of dust and a few dried leaves. The license plate was so faded I couldn't read the numbers. The engine never stopped. I stood there for what felt like an hour but was probably only 5 minutes, just listening to that sound. Trying to understand how a truck could run without keys, without a driver, without any logical explanation. The rational part of my brain suggested remote start, some kind of mechanical malfunction, a dozen reasonable possibilities. But the rest of me, the part that still remembered how to be afraid, knew this was something else. I should have left right then. Should have climbed back into my rig and driven away from that rest stop as fast as legally possible. Instead, I walked back inside. That truck, I said to the clerk, the blue Ford, how long has it actually been there? He looked up from his phone, annoyed at being interrupted again. Told you, man, wasn't there at midnight. So it showed up in the last 2.5 hours? I guess. You didn't see anyone park it? Didn't hear anything? The kid's expression shifted slightly, from bored to uneasy. Why are you so interested in some random truck? because the engine is running, but there is no driver and no keys in the ignition. He stared at me for a long moment, then set his phone down and walked over to the window. We both looked out at the parking lot. The truck sat there in the darkness, exactly where it had been, engine still rumbling away into the night. "That's weird," the clerk said quietly. "Yeah, that is weird." We stood there together, two strangers united by something we couldn't explain, watching a truck that shouldn't to be running continue to run. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The coffee maker gurgled. And underneath everything, barely audible through the walls, that constant engine sound persisted. "Maybe you should call the cops," I suggested. "And tell them what? That there is a truck in the parking lot? A truck that has been running for hours with no driver." The clerk pulled out his phone, started to dial, then stopped. "What if the owner comes back while I'm on the phone?" I'll look like an idiot. Then wait 5 minutes. If nobody shows up, make the call. I went back outside. The cold was getting deeper now, working its way through my jacket and into my bones. The stars had shifted position slightly, marking the passage of time in that slow celestial way that makes you realize how small you are. How insignificant. How easy it would be to simply disappear and have nobody notice. The truck was still running. I walked back to my rig, climbed into the cab, and sat in the driver's seat with the door open. From here, I had a clear view of the Ford. I could see its exhaust vapor rising in the cold air, a thin gray ghost that dissolved into nothing. I checked my watch. 2:53, 20 minutes since I first arrived. At 3 o'clock exactly, the parking lot lights flickered. All of them, simultaneously, a brief moment of darkness before they hummed back to life. In that instant of blackness, the world felt different. Wrong, like something had shifted position when I wasn't looking. The truck, its engine sound had changed. Not louder or quieter, just different. The rhythm was the same, but the quality had altered, as if the sound was coming from somewhere else now. Somewhere further away, or maybe closer. I couldn't tell which. Space itself seemed confused about distance. I climbed out of my cab and walked toward the truck again. I didn't want to. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in my rig and leave this place behind. But something else was pulling me forward, a curiosity that felt almost like compulsion. The need to understand, the human curse of having to know. The driver's side window was down now. I stopped walking. The window had definitely been up before. I'd seen my reflection in it, distorted and dark. Now it was down, open to the night air, and I could hear the engine so much more clearly. Could smell the exhaust, thick and acrid. Could feel the vibration traveling through the ground and up through my legs. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded small and foolish in the empty lot. Nobody answered. Nothing moved. The truck just kept running. That same steady idle that never varied, never changed, never stopped. I took another step forward, then another, until I was standing right next to the driver's door, close enough to touch the cold metal. Close enough to look inside. The interior was different now. The seats were covered in a thick layer of dust, like the truck had been sitting abandoned for decades instead of hours. The steering wheel was cracked and weathered, the dashboard covered in a film of grime. But the engine was still running, still vibrating the frame, still filling the air with that constant mechanical drone. On the dashboard, partially buried in dust, was a folded piece of paper. I reached through the open window and picked it up. My hands were shaking. The paper felt old, brittle, like it might crumble into fragments at any moment. I unfolded it carefully. The note was handwritten in pencil, the letters faded but still legible. It said, I'm sorry. I tried to turn it off, but it won. Stop. It just won. Stop. I've been here for so long and it just won. Stop running. Please help me. Please make it stop. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. The paper was dated March 17, 1974. 51 years ago. I dropped the note. It fluttered to the ground and the wind caught it, sending it skittering across the parking lot until it disappeared into the darkness. My heart was hammering in my chest, blood rushing in my ears, drowning out everything except that engine sound that never stopped, never changed, never ended. I ran back to my rig, climbed inside, locked the doors, started my own engine and felt grateful for its familiar rumble, a sound I controlled, a sound that would stop when I wanted it to. I put the truck in gear and started driving, pulling out of that rest stop as fast as I could without losing my load. In my rearview mirror, I could see the blue Ford still sitting there in the parking lot. Still running, still waiting for something or someone that would never come. I drove for 3 hours straight before I stopped again, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that place. When I finally pulled over at another rest stop just outside Flagstaff, I sat in my cab with the engine off, enjoying the silence. The beautiful, complete silence that meant my truck had stopped, that everything was normal, that the world made sense again. Except I could still hear it, faint and distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. That same diesel rumble continued. That same steady idle, that same mechanical heartbeat that never varied, never changed, never stopped. I opened my door and stepped outside, thinking maybe it was another truck nearby, another driver taking a break. The parking lot was empty, but the sound continued, growing slowly louder, getting closer. I looked down the interstate and saw headlights approaching in the distance. A single vehicle, still far away but coming toward me. As it got closer, I could make out the shape. An old pickup truck, faded blue paint, moving slowly, deliberately, like it had all the time in the world. Like it had been driving for 51 years and would keep driving forever. I got back in my truck, started the engine, pulled back onto the interstate and drove as fast as I dared, pushing my rig to its limits, trying to outrun something I didn't. Do you understand? In my mirrors, the blue Ford stayed the same distance behind me. Not gaining ground but not falling back either. Just maintaining that constant gap, that unchanging position, following me through the desert night. The sun came up eventually. The blue Ford was gone, but the sound remained, that low rumble in the back of my head that I can to escape. It's quieter during the day when there's traffic and conversation and the noise of normal life. But at night, when everything gets quiet, I can hear it clearly. That engine that never turned off. That truck that is still running somewhere, still looking for the driver who wrote that note in 1974. Still searching, and sometimes late at night when I'm alone on empty highways, I see those faded blue headlights in my mirror, getting a little closer each time, a little more persistent, like it has decided I am next, like I am the one who is supposed to climb inside and try to turn it off, and fail, and write my own desperate note for someone else to find decades from now. The truck that never turned off is still running, right now, somewhere out there in the darkness, idling in an empty parking lot, waiting for its next driver. And the sound never stops, never changes, never ends. I can hear it right now. Can you? Story 4. Register without a clerk. I shouldn't be telling you this. Every time I start, my hands shake. Every time I try to explain what happened at the Riverside truck stop on that November night, I feel like I'm living it again. But maybe speaking it aloud, maybe that is the only way to make sense of the most horrifying, inexplicable thing I ever witnessed. The kind of thing that rewires your brain. The kind of thing that makes you question everything you thought was real. Let me start with what brought me to that godforsaken place. I was driving home from a client meeting in Denver, heading east on Interstate 76 toward Nebraska. It was past midnight. I'd been on the road for 6 hours, and my eyes felt like sandpaper. My name is Michael Hayes. I am a logistics manager. I run spreadsheets and verify shipments. I am the kind of person who follows traffic laws and never speeds. I am ordinary, the kind of person you pass without noticing. That is important because what I am about to describe, it shattered the very idea that the world is ordered and predictable. The highway stretched out before me like a black tongue. Nothing but darkness in every direction. I'd been this route 100 times, but something felt different that night. The darkness seemed thicker. The few cars I passed appeared suddenly, ghosts made of headlights, then vanished behind me into the void. My radio kept cutting to static, station after station, like reality itself was glitching. At mile marker 147, the Riverside truck stop materialized from the darkness. Neon pink and sickly yellow lights cut through the night. I could see the building, its silhouette, that familiar shape of a roadside diner, squat and tired. The parking lot held maybe 8 big rigs, trucks parked in perfect rows like sleeping metal beasts. I needed coffee. I needed to move my legs. I needed to stay awake for the next hour until I reached the Nebraska border. The fluorescent lights inside hit me like a blast. Everything was too bright, too white, making my eyes water. The smell hit next. Stale grease, burnt coffee, and something else. Something underneath. Something that made the hairs on my neck stand up, though I couldn't have told you why. The diner was empty. Not unusual for a truck stop at that hour. A television mounted in the corner played some network news broadcast with no volume. An American flag hung limp beside it. I walked toward the back, toward the bathroom, moving on autopilot. My steps echoed on the linoleum. I was the only person awake in this fluorescent wasteland. The booths sat empty, their cracked vinyl seats reflecting overhead lights. Salt and pepper shakers stood sentinel on each table. Coffee cups sat upside down in their holders. Everything was frozen. Everything was waiting. After using the restroom, I made my way to the counter to grab coffee. I'd been here before. Usually, there was a tired woman in her 60s or a young guy in his 20s working the register. Tonight, there was something different, something impossible. The register was open, not like someone had left it open by accident. The cash drawer was extended fully. Bills were arranged inside with precision. Ones in one slot, fives in another, tens, 20s, all neat, all organized, all waiting to be stolen by anyone with the guts to take them. The register displayed some transaction frozen on the screen. The numbers didn't make sense, not a normal sale. They read like coordinates, like measurements, like something was counting something else. But here, it's the thing that sent terror crawling up my spine. No one was standing behind that counter. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, though it felt longer, waiting for someone to appear. A clerk, a manager, anyone. No one came. I looked around the diner. The place was definitely empty. The kitchen was dark. The back office door was closed. Nothing moved. No sounds except the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of the TV. I called out. My voice sounded strange in the silence, like it belonged to someone else. Hello? Is anyone here? The fluorescent lights hummed louder. Or maybe it was just my perception. Maybe fear makes everything seem more intense. I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. No footsteps. No voice. No sign of human presence anywhere in this building. Just me and the open register and the perfectly arranged cash and the mystery of why everything looked so clean, so prepared, so intentionally arranged. The chilling part wasn't the absence of a clerk. The chilling part was the overwhelming sense that someone had left that register open for me specifically. That someone had arranged those bills in that drawer and then vanished. That the entire scene was staged. That I was watching a performance that had paused to wait for me to process it. My rational mind tried to explain it away. Maybe the clerk was on a break. Maybe someone had run to the back. Maybe there was a manager in the office who stepped away for a moment. But something deeper, something ancient and instinctive in the human brain, knew better. That knowing made my skin crawl. I didn't touch the register. I didn't touch anything. I just stared at it. The open drawers seemed to gape like a mouth. The bills inside seemed to pulse with some kind of energy. This wasn't too right. This wasn't too normal. The wrongness of it was almost physical, like I was breathing in something toxic. Then I heard it, a sound from the kitchen, a wet sound, like something heavy being dragged across a floor. Not footsteps, not normal movement, something else entirely, something that moved wrong, something that didn't follow the rules of how things in the physical world are supposed to move. Every cell in my body screamed at me to leave. Not to run, not to be dramatic, just to turn around and walk out and get in my car and drive away and never think about this place again. My hand was already moving toward my pocket to pull out my wallet, but I stopped myself. I wouldn't acknowledge this place any more than I already had. I turned away from the counter. That's when I saw her. She was standing in the hallway between the diner and the restroom. A woman in a Riverside truck stop uniform. Pale, impossibly pale. Her name tag read, Sandra, in faded letters. She wasn't moving. She was just standing there, watching me. Her eyes, God, her eyes, they didn't track my movement. They just stared straight ahead, looking at something beyond me. Something I couldn't see. Her mouth hung slightly open, and there was blood. Not a lot, just a thin line running from the corner of her mouth down to her chin. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I did something worse. I froze. My body went rigid. The world seemed to tilt. Everything I thought was solid became uncertain. The horror of it wasn't the blood or the pale skin or the rawness of her presence. The horror was that she seemed to be looking at me while also looking through me. Like I was transparent. Like I was as much a ghost as she appeared to be. My mouth opened to speak. No sound came out. She tilted her head. It was a small movement, but it violated some fundamental law of how human necks are supposed to work. The movement was too slow, too deliberate, too aware, like she was examining me the way a scientist examines a specimen. Then she pointed at the register. Not at me, not at the open drawer. She pointed at the register itself, and her arm extended further than any arm should extend, and her fingers bent in ways that made my vision blur. And she was pointing at something I couldn't understand. I ran. I didn't think about it. My legs just moved. I turned and bolted toward the front door, pushing through the glass with both hands. The night air hit me like cold water. The parking lot stretched out before me, infinite and terrifying. My car was only 50 feet away, but it felt like miles. I could hear something behind me. Not footsteps, not running, just a sound like fabric dragging across concrete, like something moving with terrible purpose. I got to my car, fumbled with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the metal. I got inside and locked the doors. My breathing was ragged, panicked. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. That is when the fluorescent lights of the truck stop flickered. All of them at once, off and on, creating a strobe effect that turned everything into nightmare logic. In the darkness between flashes, I could see something moving in the diner. Multiple somethings, shapes that moved wrong, forms that suggested human anatomy but didn't follow the rules. They gathered around the counter, around the register, around that terrible, impossible open drawer with its neatly arranged bills. I started my car. The engine roared to life, and I threw it into reverse and tore out of that parking lot. I didn't look back until I was back on the highway, and even then, I only glanced in my mirror once. The Riverside truck stop was dark. All the lights were off. The building stood against the night sky like a mouth open in a silent scream. And in that darkness, I could see movement. Lots of it, as if the place had suddenly come alive. As if my arrival had awakened something. As if I had triggered a mechanism that had been waiting. I drove for 3 hours straight without stopping. My hands never left the steering wheel. My eyes never closed. I was shaking the entire time. The rational explanation came later. A worker had probably stepped out. An electrical issue had caused the lights to flicker. The woman I'd seen was probably real, probably dealing with some kind of medical emergency. My mind, exhausted and stressed and vulnerable, had taken these mundane explanations and twisted them into something apocalyptic. That's what I told myself. But I knew better. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I felt. That place was wrong. That place was haunted. Not by ghosts in the traditional sense, but by something far more disturbing. Something that didn't follow the rules. Something that operated on logic that human minds weren't designed to comprehend. The register without a clerk. The woman pointing at something I couldn't see. The sound of terrible movement in darkness. A week later, I went back. I don't know why. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I needed to convince myself I imagined it. Maybe something about that place had gotten under my skin in a way I couldn't shake. I told myself I'd just pull in, ask a few questions, confirm that everything was normal. The parking lot was empty. The building was closed. A sign on the door read, "Temporarily closed due to staff shortage." But here is what made my blood turn to ice. The sign was handwritten on what looked like the back of a receipt. The handwriting was shaky and desperate, like someone had written it in fear. I called the truck stop company. They had no record of this location being closed. They insisted it was operating normally. They thought I was confused. When I pushed them, when I gave them the exact location and asked them to double check, I heard them typing. Silence. Then the man on the phone said something I'll never forget. "Sir, there is no Riverside truck stop at that location." "There never was. Are you sure you have the right place?" I was sure. "I know that place exists. I've driven past it a dozen times since then. It's always there. Always dark. Always closed. Sometimes I see lights on inside, but when I look closer, they're not normal lights. They flicker and pulse with a rhythm that doesn't match any electrical system. And sometimes, late at night when I can sleep, I think about that register, that open drawer, those neatly arranged bills waiting for someone to take them. I think about what would have happened if I'd taken the money. I think about whether that woman, Sandra, was trying to warn me or lure me. I think about what those shapes in the darkness were doing at the counter. I think about what that register was displaying, those numbers that looked like coordinates. The most horrifying part of all this ISN, the unexplainable events. It's the creeping realization that began to set in as weeks turned into months. The realization that I wasn't too unique, that truck stops like that exist all across America, that every night, Exhausted drivers pull into these places looking for coffee and rest. That some of them leave, and that some of them don't. That there are places on the highways of this country where the rules don't apply. Where something has set up shop and is quietly, methodically collecting things it needs. I looked at missing persons reports. Thousands of them. People who disappeared from truck stops and rest areas and small-town diners along lonely stretches of American highway. People no one has found. People no one has explained. And I think about the register without a clerk. The cash arranged so perfectly. The woman pointing at coordinates only she could see. The sound of things moving in darkness. I think about what was being counted in that place. Sometimes, when I drive late at night, I see other truck stops similar to the riverside. Dark, closed, but with lights moving inside. And when I look at them, I swear I can see figures moving behind the windows. Standing, waiting, watching the road with the patient hunger of things that have all the time in the world. And I know, with absolute certainty, that those places are prepared for the next driver to stop. The register is open, the cash is arranged, the clerk is waiting, and somewhere on some American highway, someone like you, someone tired, someone vulnerable, someone passing through in the darkness, is going to pull in looking for coffee. That is when they'll notice it. That is when the register without a clerk will gape open, and they'll have to make a choice. Step away, or approach, take, or refuse, and whatever happens next will happen in the silence between midnight and dawn. In a place where the rules don't apply, in a building that doesn't exist on any official record, where something has been counting and waiting and preparing for exactly the kind of person who walks through that door. The most horrifying truth I've discovered is this: I wasn't too special. My experience wasn't too unique. I just happened to be lucky enough to see it and scared enough to run. Most people don't run. Most people take the cash. Most people never leave. Story 5. Coffee was still warm. I found the cabin by accident, and that is the part that still keeps me awake at night. Let me be clear about something. I've driven cross-country more times than I can count. 42 years old, divorced, no kids, just me and the open highway. I know every truck stop between Nevada and Wyoming. I know which rest areas are safe and which ones you avoid after dark. But I had never seen this road before. Not once. And I've been driving this route for 17 years. It was 3 in the morning when my GPS died. Just went black. No warning, no low battery message, nothing. 1 second it was guiding me through the darkness of rural Idaho. The next second it was a dead piece of plastic mounted to my dashboard. My phone had no signal. Of course it didn't. I was somewhere in the mountains, surrounded by trees so thick they seemed to swallow the moonlight whole. The scary part wasn't being lost. I've been lost before. The terrifying thing was the road itself. It appeared out of nowhere, branching off the main highway like it had always been there, like I somehow missed it every single time I'd driven past. The asphalt was perfect, too perfect. No cracks, no faded paint, no wear from years of traffic and weather. It looked freshly paved, cutting through the forest like a dark river. I should have turned around. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to go back, but my gas tank was running low, and I'd already driven 30 miles past the last station. So I took the turn, telling myself I'd find a town, fill up, and get back on track. That's what I told myself. That's the lie I keep repeating when I try to sleep. The road wound deeper into the mountains. My headlights caught nothing but trees and darkness. No signs, no mile markers, no reflectors on the roadside. Just that perfect black asphalt disappearing into shadow ahead of me. The silence was absolute, even with my windows up. I felt it pressing against the glass, thick and suffocating. That is when I saw the light. It was faint at first, just a warm glow filtering through the trees about a quarter mile ahead. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a building. A cabin, set back from the road, surrounded by a clearing that shouldn't have existed in such dense forest. Light poured from every window, bright and welcoming in that ocean of darkness. I pulled into the gravel driveway, my tires crunching loud enough to wake the dead. The cabin was small, maybe 1,500 square feet, built from dark wood that looked hand-hewn. A stone chimney rose from one side. The porch light was on. Everything about it looked normal, inviting even, except for one chilling detail. There were no cars, no vehicles of any kind, no tire tracks in the gravel except mine, no garage, no carport, nothing. Just this cabin, alone in the middle of nowhere, lit up like Christmas morning. I sat in my truck for a full minute, engine running, hands on the wheel. The smart move was to leave, find another way, but my gas gauge was kissing empty, and I hadn't seen another building for over an hour. I needed help. I needed directions. I needed to know where the hell I was. The porch stairs didn't creak when I climbed them. New wood, solid construction. I knocked on the door. 3 sharp raps that echoed across the clearing. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time, and it's when I noticed the door wasn't quite closed. It was open maybe half an inch, just enough to see a sliver of the interior. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded strange, muted somehow, like the forest was absorbing the sound before it could travel. "Anyone home? I'm lost and I need some help." Nothing, just that eerie silence pressing down on everything. I pushed the door open slowly. It swung inward without a sound, and warm air rushed out to meet me. The smell hit me immediately. Coffee, fresh brewed coffee, rich and dark and impossibly inviting. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since noon, and it was now approaching 4 in the morning. The interior was immaculate, hardwood floors polished to a shine, a stone fireplace with a fire burning low, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Comfortable furniture arranged in a cozy living room. Everything looked lived in, comfortable, normal, except it was completely empty. "Hello," I tried again, stepping inside. "Your door was open." I didn't mean to intrude, but I am lost in my phone. It's not working. The coffee smell was stronger now, pulling me toward the kitchen. I found it through an arched doorway, and that's when the fear started crawling up my spine like cold fingers. The coffee pot was full. Steam rose from the dark liquid inside, curling up into the air. Next to it, 3 mugs sat on the counter, arranged in a perfect row. The coffee was fresh, not from an hour ago, not from that morning. It had just been made minutes ago, maybe seconds, but there was nobody there. I backed out of the kitchen, my heart starting to hammer in my chest. This was wrong. Everything about this was horrifying and wrong. People don't just brew coffee and disappear. They don't leave their doors open and their fires burning and vanish into thin air. "I'm leaving," I announced to the empty cabin. "I'm sorry I came in. I'll just go." I turned toward the front door, and that was when I saw the photographs. They covered an entire wall of the living room, dozens of them, maybe 100, all in matching frames. I hadn't noticed them when I first entered, but now I couldn't look away. They were family photos, camping trips, birthdays, holidays. Different people, different families, different decades judging by the clothing and photo quality. Some were in color, some in black and white, some had that faded yellow tint of pictures from the 70s. But they all had one thing in common. Every single photograph included this cabin, in the background, in the foreground, always present. This exact cabin, with its dark wood and stone chimney and front porch. The cabin that had no business being in all these different people. This family album spanning what looked like 50 years. My hands were shaking now. I needed to leave. I needed to run, but I couldn't stop staring at those pictures, searching each one for clues, for answers, for anything that would explain what I was seeing. That's when I noticed the dates written in the corners. Small, neat handwriting marking each photograph. The oldest was from 1974. The most recent was from 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, I pulled out my phone, thinking I could take pictures of the photographs, document this disturbing discovery. Still no signal, but the camera worked. I started snapping photos, moving along the wall, capturing each frame. The flash lit up the room in stuttering bursts of white light. Then I saw it. In one of the photos from 1989, a family of 4 stood in front of the cabin. Mom, Dad, 2 kids. They were smiling, relaxed, happy. And behind them, barely visible in the cabin, his front window, was a shadow. A dark shape that didn't quite look human. Too tall, too thin, with proportions that made my eyes hurt when I tried to focus on it. I checked the next photo. Different family, different year. Same shadow in the window. Every photograph had it. That same impossible silhouette, lurking just behind the glass. Watching these families pose and smile without any idea it was there. The temperature in the cabin dropped. I could see my breath suddenly. White clouds puffing out in front of me. The fire in the fireplace was still burning, but the cold was absolute. bone deep, terrifying. It didn't feel like winter cold. It felt wrong, unnatural, like the absence of warmth rather than just low temperature. Something moved upstairs. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing the ceiling above my head. Back and forth, following the length of the room. I froze, every muscle locked, my breath caught in my throat. The footsteps stopped for 5 seconds, maybe 10. There was perfect silence. Then they started coming down the stairs. I ran. I don't remember making the decision. 1 second I was standing there paralyzed. The next I was sprinting for the front door. I hit it at full speed, burst out onto the porch, and that is when the screaming started. It came from everywhere and nowhere, filling the forest with sound. Not human screaming, not animal, something else entirely, a noise that bypassed my ears and went straight into my brain, making my teeth ache and my vision blur. It rose and fell in waves, echoing off the mountains, making the trees shake. I fell down the porch stairs, scrambled to my feet, and ran for my truck. My keys. Where were my keys? I patted my pockets frantically. They were still in the ignition. Thank God. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, turned the key. Nothing happened. The engine wouldn't turn over. Not even a click. The dashboard was completely dark. My truck was dead as my GPS and phone, as dead as I was about to be if I didn't move. The cabin door was open. The light from inside spilled out onto the porch, and in that light, I could see a shadow growing, stretching, reaching toward me like a hand across the ground. It was coming outside, whatever was in there. It was coming for me. I abandoned the truck and ran into the forest. Branches tore at my face and clothes. Roots tried to trip me. The darkness was complete, absolute, suffocating. I couldn't see 3 feet in front of me, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Behind me, the screaming continued, mixed now with other sounds. Footsteps, not human footsteps. Too many of them, moving too fast, coming from multiple directions. I ran for what felt like hours. My lungs were on fire. My legs were cramping. Blood ran down my face from a dozen small cuts. And then, suddenly, miraculously, I broke through the tree line onto a road. Not the perfect black asphalt I'd been on before. This was old highway, cracked and worn, with faded yellow lines and a rusted guardrail. A real road, a road I recognized. Headlights appeared in the distance. I stumbled into the middle of the highway, waving my arms. The semi-truck nearly hit me before the driver saw me and slammed on the brakes. The rig stopped 20 feet away, air brakes hissing. "What the hell are you doing?" the driver shouted, jumping down from the cab. He was in his 60s, gray beard, concerned eyes. "You trying to get yourself killed?" I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. I just pointed back at the forest, trying to warn him, trying to make him understand. "Easy there, buddy," he said, grabbing my shoulders. "You were bleeding pretty good. Let me call for help." He pulled out his phone. He had signal, 5 bars, perfect reception. The police came, paramedics. They treated my cuts, checked me for concussion, asked me 1,000 questions. I told them about the cabin, about the coffee and the photographs and the shadow in the window, about the road that shouldn't exist. They searched, spent 3 days combing those woods with dogs and helicopters and volunteers. They never found the cabin, never found my truck, never found that perfect black road. According to the Forest Service, the area I described was old-growth forest, untouched for centuries. No structures, no roads, no clearings, nothing but trees. But here is the thing they couldn't explain. When they developed the photos on my phone, the ones I'd taken inside the cabin, they were all there. Clear as day. The photographs on the wall, the dates, the shadow in every window. And in the last picture I'd taken, the one right before I ran, there was something new. Another photograph on the wall that I hadn't noticed before. It showed me, standing in that living room, taking pictures with my phone. The date in the corner was from that night. And in the window behind me, that same impossible shadow was reaching out, inches from my back. They kept my phone as evidence. Told me they'd investigate further. That was 6 months ago. I haven't heard from them since. But I know they found something. They must have. Because 2 weeks after I gave my statement, the detective who interviewed me quit the force. Just walked away from 20 years of service without explanation. And the trucker who saved me? He sold his rig and moved to Florida. Juan. to return my calls. I don't to drive at night anymore. Can to handle it, and I never take roads I don't to recognize, even in daylight. Because sometimes, when I'm lying in bed trying to sleep, I can still smell it. Fresh coffee, rich and dark and impossibly inviting. And I know, with a certainty that turns my blood to ice, that somewhere in those mountains, in a cabin that may or may not exist, there is a fresh pot brewing. And another mug waiting on the counter. Story 6. Bathroom door that wouldn't open. I need to tell you what happened at the Clearview Motel before I forget the details. Before my mind starts protecting itself by burying the memory. Before I convince myself it was all a nightmare. But I know it wasn't. I know exactly what I experienced. And I know that there are places in this country where something is fundamentally wrong with reality itself. Where the rules of the physical world stop applying. Where danger waits in the most ordinary locations, wearing the mask of everyday normalcy. My name is Thomas Garrett. I am a 56-year-old man. I sell commercial HVAC systems for a living. I drive across the Midwest visiting clients, staying in roadside motels, eating at diners, living a life so ordinary and unremarkable that you forget my face 5 minutes after meeting me. I am exactly the kind of person to whom terrifying things should never happen. I am exactly the person who should have a boring life. That is why what happened to me is so important for you to hear. It was late October when I pulled into the Clearview Motel on Highway 61 in southern Illinois. The sun had just set, leaving the sky that deep purple color that only happens in autumn. The motel was a single-story structure, shaped like an L, with maybe 30 rooms arranged around a small parking lot. The building was old, probably built in the 1950s or 60s. The paint was faded. The neon sign flickered with that classic orange glow. Everything about it screamed that it was exactly what it appeared to be, a cheap roadside motel where traveling salespeople slept. The office was warm and smelled like old carpet and cigarette smoke. The manager was an older woman with dyed red hair and tired eyes. She didn't ask many questions. She just handed me a key and took my credit card. Room 127. At the far end of the L, away from the office, away from other guests, away from anywhere someone might hear if something went wrong. I should have noticed that at the time. I should have recognized the omen. My room was like every other motel room I'd ever stayed in. 2 double beds with thin comforters, a television bolted to a dresser, stained carpet that had seen too many feet, walls that held the ghosts of 1,000 conversations. The bathroom was small and cramped, with a shower tub combination and a single overhead light that hummed slightly. Everything was clean enough, though nothing felt new. Nothing felt quite right either, but I was exhausted, and I didn't have the energy to care. I showered. The water was hot, which was rare for a motel this old. It felt good. Steam filled the bathroom, fogging the mirror and creating that cocooned feeling you get in a hot shower when the rest of the world seems very far away. I stood under the spray and tried to relax my shoulders. I'd been driving for 10 hours. My neck was tight. My back ached. That's when I heard it. A sound from inside the walls. Not a pipe, not the sound of the building settling. A deliberate sound. A repetitive thumping, like something was knocking from inside the walls themselves. Knock, 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 slow and methodical, like someone was trying to get my attention. I turned off the water. The knocking stopped immediately. I stood there, dripping, listening to the silence. The bathroom was still full of steam. My breath came out in white clouds. The single light overhead hummed its monotonous tone. The knocking didn't resonate. After maybe a minute, I convinced myself I imagined it. The power of suggestion, the creepy atmosphere of an old motel playing tricks on my mind. I finished rinsing off and got out of the shower. I dried myself, put on clean clothes, and tried to sleep. The television droned quietly in the background. Something was playing on cable, some late-night talk show with an audience that laughed at jokes I couldn't hear. The mattress was harder than I expected. The pillow was too flat. The air conditioning unit in the corner made a clicking sound every few minutes. I lay awake for probably 2 hours before finally drifting off into an uneasy sleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. The kind of urgent need that jerks you awake and makes you realize you've been dreaming. I stumbled out of bed in the darkness, moving on instinct toward where I knew the bathroom door was located. I opened it and stepped inside. The light came on automatically, responding to my movement. The bathroom looked exactly as it had before. Nothing was different. Nothing was wrong. I did what I needed to do, and then I turned to leave. The door wouldn't open. I tried the handle. It was a standard motel bathroom door, the kind you find everywhere, with a simple push-button lock on the inside. The button was already in the unlocked position. I pushed. The door didn't budge. I pushed harder. Still nothing. A creepy feeling started to settle into my chest. That mixture of confusion and fear that happens when something doesn't behave the way it should. I tried the handle again. It turned freely, but the door was solid. Stuck, locked somehow from the outside, even though I did just come through it moments before. I rattled the handle. I pushed with my shoulder. The door was sturdy, designed for durability rather than aesthetics. It wasn't good to give. I was trapped in a small bathroom in a cheap motel in the middle of the night, locked in by a force I couldn't explain. My breathing started to get faster. Panic was starting to creep in at the edges of my consciousness. The bathroom suddenly felt much smaller than it had before. The air felt thick. The walls felt closer. The light overhead hummed its endless, monotonous tone. I knocked on the door. Polite knocks at first, just trying to get the attention of anyone who might be in the room. No response. I knocked harder. Still nothing. The room was silent except for the hum of the light and the sound of my own breathing, which was getting progressively faster. That's when the light flickered. Just once. A split-second flicker that sent a jolt of pure fear through my nervous system. The kind of fear that comes from the unknown. The kind that reminds you how vulnerable you really are. How dependent you are on electricity and locks and all the systems that usually keep you safe. I stopped knocking. The light stabilized. The flickering didn't return. But now my heart was racing. Now the creepy feeling had transformed into genuine fear. Something was happening here. Something that didn't follow the normal rules of cause and effect. I tried the door again. It still wouldn't open. I was trapped. I was actually trapped in a bathroom at a motel. And no one knew I was there. No one even knew I was at this location. I deregistered with a fake name. I paid cash. I was completely alone in this bathroom with whatever force had locked me inside. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub and tried to think logically. There had to be an explanation. The door was probably just swollen from humidity. The mechanism was stuck. The lock was faulty. There was a rational explanation for everything. That's what I told myself. That is what my conscious mind insisted on, even as my instincts were screaming that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I waited maybe 15 minutes. Then I knocked again. This time, I was more forceful. I needed out. I needed the door to open. I needed to prove that I wasn't trapped. That this was all just a mechanical failure that would resolve if I applied enough pressure. The lights flickered again. This time, they didn't flicker. They went out completely. The bathroom went dark. Total, absolute darkness. The kind of darkness you only find in enclosed spaces with no windows. The kind that seems to have weight and substance. I stood up from the bathtub. My hands were trembling. My breathing was shallow. I was trapped in a dark bathroom with no explanation for why the door wouldn't open or why the lights had failed. Then I heard it. Breathing. Not my breathing. Someone else's breathing. Coming from the other side of the door. Slow and deliberate. Steady and patient. The kind of breathing someone makes when they standing very still, listening to you, waiting for you to do something. I knocked again. The lights came back on instantly. Full brightness. No flickering this time. Just on. And when the lights came on, the breathing stopped. The silence was worse than the breathing. I stood in that bathroom for another hour, maybe longer. I lost track of time. I knocked every few minutes, and every time I knocked, the lights would flicker. But the door still wouldn't open. I was in some kind of terrible loop. I was trapped, and the only thing I could prove worked was my ability to make the lights flicker with my knocking. At some point, exhaustion overwhelmed fear. I sat down in the bathtub, my back against the cold porcelain. And I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe for someone to come looking for me. Maybe for the door to open on its own. Maybe for whatever was on the other side to grow tired of this game and move on. Eventually, the light came back on. It had been off for several minutes, though I am not entirely sure how long. The darkness had been absolute. My sense of time had broken down completely. I stopped being able to distinguish minutes from hours. The light flickered once. Then the door swung open. Not slowly, not gradually, all at once, as if someone had been standing on the other side with their hand on the handle, waiting for some signal to pull it open. I stumbled out of the bathroom, my legs unsteady from sitting in the bathtub for so long. The motel room beyond was dark. The television was off. The air conditioning was off. Everything was silent. The room felt different. The shape seemed wrong somehow. The perspective didn't match what I remembered. The walls felt like they were at slightly different angles than they should have been. The distances seemed off. My eyes couldn't quite adjust to the geometry of the space. I walked toward where I thought the door to the hallway was located. My hands were shaking. My mind was struggling to process what had just happened. The door to the bathroom had been locked. It had been locked by something outside the bathroom, something that could control the lights, something that breathed slowly and waited patiently. I found the door to the hallway. It was where I remembered it being, but something about reaching it felt like it took longer than it should have. The room seemed bigger than it had been when I arrived. The space seemed to stretch. I pulled open the door. The hallway was lit by old fluorescent lights. They hummed like the bathroom light had hummed. The motel hallway extended in both directions, lined with numbered doors. I stepped out of my room and closed the door behind me. The sound of the lock clicking was the most reassuring thing I heard all night. I walked toward the office, toward the lights, toward other people. My feet echoed on the thin carpet. The hallway felt impossibly long. Door after door passed by me. Doors that looked identical. Doors that led to rooms where other guests might be sleeping, or where something else might be waiting. I made it to the office. The manager was sleeping in a chair behind the counter, her head tilted back, her mouth open slightly. I didn't want to wake her. I didn't want to have to explain what had happened. I just wanted to leave. I grabbed my keys from my car, got in, and drove away from the Clearview Motel at 2 a.m. I drove for 3 hours before I felt safe enough to stop. What I experienced that night doesn't fit into normal categories of explanation. A door that locked from the outside while I was inside. Lights that flickered in response to my knocking. Breathing on the other side of a solid barrier. The creepy sensation that something was waiting for me. The terrifying knowledge that I was completely alone and completely at the mercy of forces I couldn't. Do you understand? I tried to rationalize it. I told myself that old motels have faulty mechanisms. That I was dreaming. That the stress of work and travel had made me hallucinate. But I know what I experienced was real. And here is the part that keeps me awake at night. The part that makes this story truly horrifying. I checked my credit card statement 2 days later. The charge for the Clearview Motel was there, dated for the correct date. But the duration wasn't one night. It was marked as a 7-night stay. 7 nights at the Clearview Motel, charged to my card, even though I'd only been there for a few hours before fleeing. I called the motel. The manager answered. I asked her about my stay. There was a long pause. Then she told me something that made my blood turn cold. She said I'd checked in on October 12th. She said I'd been a quiet guest. She said I never left my room. She said that housekeeping had been instructed not to service my room because I marked the do not disturb sign every day. But I was never there for 7 days. I left in the middle of my first night. I escaped through the front gate and drove away. She insisted that I was still registered, that I was still paying for the room, that according to her records, I wouldn't be checking out until tonight. October 19th, 7 days after I checked in, I asked her if she'd see me. She said no. She said that she only saw people entering the building. She never saw them leave. She said that sometimes guests came back day after day, coming to the office for ice or towels. But they never looked quite the same. They never looked quite like themselves. I haven't slept in a real bed since that night. I've been driving to hotels in well-lit chains with cameras and night security. I've been avoiding old buildings and empty hallways. I've been avoiding any place that feels even remotely like that motel. But here, it's what terrifies me most. Here, it's what makes this story so disturbing that I need to tell it to anyone who will listen. I am still paying for that room. The charge comes through on my card every month. Still dated to the Clearview Motel. Still marked as an extended stay. The balance just keeps growing. Like someone is living there. Like some version of me is still checked into that room. Like I never actually left. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I hear it. The sound of a bathroom door closing. The click of a lock engaging. The slow, patient breathing of something waiting for someone to knock. The lights flickering in response to knocking that is not coming from my room. It is coming from somewhere else in the world. From another guest. From another person who checked into a bathroom door that wanted to open. Another person discovering that they re-trapped. Another person making the lights flicker with their desperate knocking. And every time I hear it, I understand a little more about what the motel really is. I understand that it's not a place where people stay. It Is it a place where people get collected? Where doors lock from the outside? Where something waits patiently for guests to exhaust themselves trying to escape? I think about checking back in sometimes. I think about going back and finding out if I'm still there. If some version of me is still sitting in that bathtub, still knocking on that door, still trapped in that bathroom where the lights flicker and something breathes on the other side. But I know the truth. I know that if I went back, the door might open immediately. It might welcome me back. And this time, it might not let me out. Some places aren't designed for guests to check out. Some places collect people the way other places collect ghosts. The Clearview Motel is still waiting. And somewhere tonight, another driver will pull into that parking lot, exhausted and alone, looking for a place to sleep. That bathroom door is still occupied, still locked from the outside, still waiting for the next person brave or foolish enough to try the handle. The danger isn't in the building itself. The danger is in the knowing. The danger is in understanding that some doors don't open because whatever is on the other side doesn't want them to. And the lights will keep flickering. Night after night, guest after guest, endlessly. Story 7. Same car came back. The same car came back 3 times before I realized the driver had been dead for hours. And by then I was already part of whatever horrifying game was being played at the Whispering Pines rest stop. I took the night shift at the rest area off Interstate 80 in Pennsylvania because I needed the money and nobody else wanted to work those creepy midnight hours. The job was simple enough. Pump gas, sell coffee and snacks, keep the bathrooms clean, watch for trouble. Most nights were boring, just tired truckers and the occasional family pushing through to make time. But that night in October, everything changed in ways that still make me question my own sanity. It started at 11:45. A silver Honda Accord pulled up to pump number 3, and I watched the driver through the security camera feeds in my booth. He was ordinary looking, maybe 50 years old, wearing a brown jacket, thinning hair. He paid at the pump with a credit card, filled his tank, and drove off heading west. Nothing unusual, nothing scary, nothing worth remembering. Just another tired traveler passing through the darkness. 10 minutes later, the same car pulled in again. Same pump. Pump number 3. I sat up straighter in my chair, confused. The silver Accord parked in exactly the same position, and the driver got out. Same brown jacket, same movements. He started filling his tank again, even though he'd just done it. I figured maybe he'd forgotten something, or maybe his card hadn't gone through properly, though that made no sense since I'd seen the transaction complete. I kept watching the monitor, feeling the first whispers of unease crawling up my spine. Something felt wrong about this, though I couldn't articulate what. The man finished pumping, got back in his car, and drove off. Same direction, west on Interstate 80, disappearing into the night. 15 minutes passed. I made my rounds, checked the bathrooms, refilled the coffee station. The rest area was empty except for one sleeping semi-truck in the far corner of the lot. The October wind rattled the windows, and dead leaves skittered across the pavement like frightened insects. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed their eternal song, casting that sickly yellow glow that makes everything look slightly unreal. Then I heard it, the sound of a car pulling in. I looked at the monitors and felt my blood turn cold. The silver Honda Accord, pump number 3. The same driver climbed out, wearing that brown jacket, and began filling his tank for the 3rd time. This wasn't right. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. My hands started shaking as I stared at the screen. The man moved like a puppet on strings, his actions mechanical and precise. Fill tank, replace nozzle, get in car, drive away west. I grabbed my phone and checked the transaction log. 3 separate charges to 3 different credit cards, all in the last 40 minutes. 3 times the same man had stopped, filled his tank with gas he didn't need, and driven away. Unless it wasn't the same man. That thought sent ice through my veins. What if there were 3 identical men driving 3 identical cars? But that was insane. The chances of that were impossible. No, it had to be the same person, the same vehicle, coming back somehow. But how? And why? The wind picked up outside, howling around the building with a sound that reminded me of screaming. I pulled up the security footage from earlier in the night, rewinding to the first time the Accord had appeared. I watched the grainy video carefully, looking for any detail I'd missed. The man filled his tank, taking exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He replaced the nozzle, got in his car, and drove toward the exit. But here, it's what made my heart hammer against my ribs. I let the footage keep rolling, watching the empty highway beyond the rest stop. The Accord should have appeared on the westbound interstate, visible for at least 30 seconds as it passed under the lights. But it never did. The car reached the exit ramp and simply vanished, as if it had driven off the edge of reality itself. I checked the second visit. Same thing. The car reached the exit and disappeared. Not drove out of frame. Disappeared. One frame it was there. The next it was gone, like someone had edited it out of existence. My skin crawled with fear as I watched the live feed. The rest area was still empty except for that sleeping truck. No cars on the highway. No movement anywhere. Just darkness and wind and that terrible waiting feeling, like the moment before lightning strikes. 20 minutes later, the Honda came back. Fourth time, same driver, same brown jacket, same mechanical movements, but this time I noticed something that made the situation infinitely more terrifying. As the man pumped gas, I zoomed in on the security camera feed. His face was blank, not expressionless, blank, like a mannequin or a doll. His eyes didn't blink. His chest didn't move with breathing. He simply stood there, performing the motions of filling a tank, but there was no life behind those eyes. No humanity, just something wearing the shape of a man. When he finished, he turned and looked directly at the security camera. Looked right at me through the lens. And his mouth opened far too wide, revealing darkness inside. Not a throat, not teeth, just infinite black emptiness that seemed to pull at my vision, making me dizzy. Then he got in the car and drove away. I stumbled back from the monitors, my breath coming in sharp gasps. This wasn't natural. This wasn't possible. I needed to call someone. The police, my supervisor, anyone. But when I grabbed the phone, there was no dial tone. Just static, mixed with something that might have been whispering. Voices speaking words in languages I didn't recognize, all talking at once, creating a sound that made my teeth ache. The lights flickered. Once, twice. In the distance, I heard what sounded like a car engine approaching. My whole body tensed as I forced myself to look at the monitors again. The Honda was coming back, but this time it wasn't alone. Behind it, barely visible in the darkness beyond the lights, I could see other vehicles. A whole line of them, stretching back into the night. Old cars, new cars, trucks, vans, all following the Honda in a silent procession. And as they came closer, I realized with mounting horror that I recognized some of them. A blue pickup truck that had stopped for gas 3 weeks ago, its driver asking for directions before vanishing. A red sedan that had been abandoned in the lot 2 months back, keys still in the ignition. A white minivan that state police had been searching for after an entire family disappeared without a trace. They all pulled into the rest area, forming a circle around the building. Engines running, headlights pointed inward, creating a cage of light. And in each vehicle, I could see a driver. All of them blank-faced. All of them staring at my little booth with those empty, hungry eyes. The Honda parked at pump 3 again. The driver got out, but this time he didn't go for the gas pump. He walked toward my booth, his movements jerky and wrong, like a film with missing frames. Behind him, the doors of the other vehicles opened, and more figures emerged. Men, women, children, all wearing the clothes they disappeared in, all moving with that same horrible puppet-like motion. I ran for the back door, but it wouldn't open. The lock was jammed, or maybe the door had sealed itself shut. The windows wouldn't break no matter how hard I hit them. I was trapped, and the things outside were getting closer. Their feet made no sound on the pavement. They simply glided forward, a small army of the missing and the lost, all converging on my location. Then I understood. This place, Whispering Pines Rest Stop, it was a trap. A hunting ground. Something had claimed this location, turned it into a snare for travelers. The people in those cars weren't ghosts. They were bait. They were lures, repeating their last moments over and over, drawing attention, creating patterns that would eventually trap someone new. And tonight, that someone was me. The figures pressed against the windows, their faces inches from the glass. Up close, I could see that their skin had a waxy quality, like melted plastic. Their eyes were completely white, no pupils, no color. And from their mouths came that whispering sound I heard on the phone. Thousands of voices speaking at once, saying things that hurt to hear. The man in the brown jacket pressed his palm against the window. Where he touched, frost spread across the glass, forming patterns that looked almost like words. I watched in terror as a message appeared, written in ice crystals. Your turn to drive. The lights in my booth began to fail, one by one, darkness swallowing the space around me. In that growing shadow, I felt something else present, something vast and ancient and utterly inhuman. The people outside weren't the real threat. They were just extensions of it, fingers of something much larger reaching out from wherever it lived. I backed into the corner, my mind racing for any possible escape. That's when I remembered the sleeping semi-truck in the parking lot. The driver had been there all night, hadn't he moved. With sudden, terrible certainty, I knew that truck driver was my only chance. If he was still human, still unchanged, maybe together we could break through whatever boundary had sealed this place off from the normal world. Using the last functioning camera, I zoomed in on the truck, his cab. The interior light was on, and I could see the driver sitting behind the wheel, awake, staring straight ahead. As I watched, he slowly turned his head toward my booth. Our eyes met through the camera, across the darkness and distance, and he smiled. Not a human smile, something that used too many muscles, stretched too wide, revealed too many teeth. The truck driver had been part of this from the beginning. There was no help coming, no escape. This thing, whatever it was, had planned everything perfectly. The figures outside began to move in unison, their hands scraping against the walls of my booth, creating a sound like screaming metal. The windows started to crack, not breaking but developing hairline fractures that spread like spider webs. Through the gaps, I could smell something putrid. Rotting meat and burning plastic, and underneath it all, something sweet and sickening that made my stomach heave. In desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I ran to the computer terminal and pulled up the security system, its master controls. If I couldn't escape, maybe I could at least leave evidence. I started downloading footage to every cloud service I could access, uploading videos to random servers, sending files anywhere and everywhere. Someone would see this. Someone would know what happened here. As I worked, the booth, its walls began to bend inward. The figures outside weren't pushing. They were simply existing, and their presence was warping reality itself. The laws of physics didn't apply to them. They occupied space in ways that normal matter couldn't. And the building was collapsing under the weight of their impossible existence. I managed to upload the last file just as the windows finally shattered. Cold air rushed in, carrying that terrible smell and those whispering voices. The figures climbed through the broken windows, their movements fluid now, graceful, like dancers. They reached for me with fingers that were too long, too thin, ending in points that weren't quite nails and weren't quite claws. I felt their touch, cold as deep winter, invasive as surgery. They were changing me, rewriting something fundamental about my existence. I could feel my thoughts becoming sluggish, my movements mechanical. My face went numb, and when I touched it, the skin felt waxy and wrong. They were turning me into one of them. Another lure, another puppet to drive endlessly, stopping and returning, until someone new took my place. The last coherent thought I had was a realization of the true horror. This wasn't just happening here. Rest stops all across America. How many were like this? How many travelers had disappeared into these traps, becoming eternal bait for the next victim? How many times had people seen the same car come back, dismissed it as coincidence, never realizing they were watching something hunt? Now I am one of them. I drive a silver Honda Accord, wearing a brown jacket that I sent to mine. I pull into rest stops in the dead of night, fill a tank that is never empty, and drive away into darkness that leads nowhere. And 10 minutes later, I come back. Same pump, same movements, same horrifying purpose. Sometimes I see them watching from inside the booths, the new attendants, the fresh victims. I see the confusion in their eyes when my car returns for the second time. The fear when it comes back a third time. The terror when they finally understand. And I smile at them with my too wide mouth, knowing that soon they'll take my place behind the wheel, and I'll finally be free to serve in other ways. Maybe I'll become one of the figures that surrounds the booth. Maybe I'll get to touch the next victim, feel them change under my impossible hands. The thing that owns us, we never see it clearly. Just shadows within shadows. Something enormous moving in the spaces between rest stops, connecting them all like web strands. It feeds on the fear and confusion of travelers, on that moment of realization when they understand there is no escape. It's been feeding for decades, maybe longer, growing stronger with each new addition to its collection. If you read driving late at night and you stop at a rest area that seems too quiet, too empty, pay attention. Watch the other vehicles carefully. If you see the same car come back, don't to dismiss it. Don't to rationalize it. Just leave. Drive until you reach a town, a city, anywhere with real people and real light. Because once you stay long enough to see that car return 3 times, it is already too late. The trap has closed. The thing has noticed you. And soon you'll be the one coming back, over and over, wearing someone else's face, driving someone else's car, serving something that should never exist in our world. I'm still at pump 3 right now. I've been filling my tank for hours, days, years. Time doesn't work right anymore. I watch new attendants come and go. Watch them realize and transform. The cycle continues. The rest stop never closes. And if you re-listening to this, if you've made it this far, check your rearview mirror. Is there a car behind you that you've seen before? Has it been following you for longer than seems natural? Are you sure you're still driving on the highway you started on? Because the thing is always hunting, always watching, and rest stops are everywhere, waiting in the darkness, ready to swallow whoever stops just a little too long. The same car always comes back, and someday, that car might be yours. Story 8. Night shift at Hollow Creek Market. The security monitor in the back office showed something moving in aisle 7. The problem was, I just walked through every aisle in the store, and I was completely alone. Let me back up. My name is Mike, and 3 months ago I took a night shift job at a convenience store in Hollow Creek, Montana. Population 800. The kind of forgotten small town where everyone knows everyone, where the buildings are older than most people, whose grandparents, and where nothing ever happens. I needed the money after my divorce, and working midnight to 6 meant I rarely had to deal with customers. Just me, the fluorescent lights, and the unsettling silence of an empty store. The Hollow Creek Market sits at the edge of town on Route 12, a 2-lane highway that cuts through endless pine forests. The building is old, maybe from the 50s, with that classic roadside store look. Faded red brick, a tilting sign, windows covered in ads for beer and lottery tickets. During the day, it is harmless. At night, it feels different, wrong, like the darkness presses against the windows, trying to get inside. The security system was installed in 2003 by the previous owner, a man named Carl Hendricks, who, according to local stories, just disappeared one night during his shift. They found the store unlocked, the register untouched, and Carl gone. No note, no explanation, just empty. The cameras he installed covered every angle of the store. 12 monitors mounted on the wall behind the counter, each one showing a different view. Aisles 1 through 8, the front entrance, the back stockroom, the freezer section, the parking lot. I'd been watching those monitors for 3 months, and they always shown exactly what they should. Empty aisles, flickering lights, the occasional car passing on the highway. Nothing scary, nothing disturbing, just boring footage of an empty store at 3 in the morning. Until tonight, it started normal enough. I arrived at midnight, unlocked the front door, and went through my usual routine. Check the register, make fresh coffee that nobody would buy, restock the cigarettes behind the counter. The store smelled like old linoleum and artificial cherry air freshener, a combination that made my stomach turn but that I did learn to ignore. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for my truck, sitting under the single working streetlight. Around 1 in the morning, I noticed the first strange thing. Monitor 7, which showed the frozen food aisle, flickered for just a moment. A brief interruption in the feed, like someone had passed in front of the camera. But when I looked up from my phone, the monitor showed the same empty aisle. Rows of frost-covered freezer doors reflecting the overhead lights. Nothing moving, nothing there. I chalked it up to the old equipment. These cameras were ancient, practically antiques, and they glitched sometimes. The wiring in this building was older than me, but then it happened again at 1:15. Monitor 7 flickered. This time I was staring right at it, and I saw something that made my skin crawl. For just a fraction of a second, there was a shadow in the aisle. A dark shape, human-sized, standing perfectly still between the freezers. Then it was gone. I grabbed the flashlight we kept under the counter and walked to aisle 7. My footsteps echoed on the old tile floor, each step sounding too loud in the silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that electrical buzz that you stop noticing after a while, but that suddenly seemed deafening. I reached the frozen food section and stopped, shining my flashlight down the aisle. Empty. Completely empty. Just freezers and shadows and the steady hum of refrigeration units working to keep everything cold. I walked the length of the aisle slowly, checking behind every freezer door, looking for any explanation. Nothing. I was alone. The store was empty. Whatever I'd seen on the monitor was just a glitch, a trick of old technology and an overactive imagination. Except when I got back to the counter, monitor 7 was showing the aisle I'd just left. And standing exactly where I'd been standing, visible on the screen but not in reality, was a dark figure. Motionless, watching the camera. My heart started hammering. This wasn't a glitch. This was something else. Something horrifying and impossible and real. I stared at the monitor, watching this shadow stand in an aisle I knew was empty, and felt fear crawling up my spine like ice water in my veins. The figure on the monitor turned its head, slowly, deliberately, until it was looking directly at the camera, directly at me. I ran back to aisle 7, my breath coming in short gasps, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The aisle was still empty, but on the monitor behind the counter, I could see myself running, could see my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. And I could see that figure still standing there, superimposed over reality like a ghost, like something that existed only on camera but not in the actual world. This was when the real terror began, the creepy realization that something was in the store with me, something I could only see through the security monitors, something that existed in that electronic space between recording and reality. I returned to the counter and forced myself to study all 12 monitors. Aisles 1 through 6 showed exactly what they should. Empty store, fluorescent lights, products on shelves. But aisle 7 still showed that figure, now closer to the camera than before, moving slowly forward with a strange, jerky gait like old film footage. Then monitor 4 flickered, the candy aisle, and suddenly there was another figure there. Same dark shape, same unsettling stillness, standing among the chocolate bars and gum, perfectly motionless, facing the camera. Then monitor 2, the chip aisle, another figure. Monitor 9, the stockroom, another one. They were multiplying, appearing one by one on different monitors, spreading through the store like an infection, like darkness taking physical form. And I could only see them on the screens. When I looked at the actual aisles with my own eyes, there was nothing there. Just empty space and products and that horrible fluorescent lighting that suddenly seemed inadequate. That left too many shadows, too many places where something could hide. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but there was no signal. Not unusual out here in the woods, but the timing felt deliberate, malicious, like something didn't want me getting help. The store's landline was in the back office, which meant walking past 4 aisles that the monitors showed were occupied by those dark figures. The monitors flickered again, all of them simultaneously, and when they came back on, every single screen showed figures. Dozens of them, filling every aisle, crowding the stockroom, pressed against the windows of the front entrance. All facing the cameras, all perfectly still, all watching. I could feel my sanity starting to crack. This was impossible, horrifying, a nightmare made real, except I was wide awake and these things, whatever they were really here. The store felt different now, heavier, like the air itself had changed, had become thick with an invisible presence that made it hard to breathe. One of the figures on monitor 7 moved, not the jerky movement from before. This was smooth, natural, human. It walked forward until it was directly in front of the camera, filling the screen, and I could finally see details. It had no face, just a smooth, dark surface where features should have been. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, just blank emptiness staring at the camera, staring at me. Then it reached up toward the camera, and the monitor went black. One by one, the other monitors started going dark. The figures on each screen approaching their respective cameras, reaching up with hands I couldn't quite see clearly, and then static. Black screens spreading across the wall like dominoes falling. Monitor 8, Monitor 3, Monitor 11, until only Monitor 1 remained, showing the front counter where I was standing. Showing me, alone, staring at the screens. And showing something else, standing directly behind me, close enough to touch. I spun around and there was nothing there. The counter was empty. But on the single remaining monitor, the figure was still visible, standing in the space I knew was vacant. Its featureless face turned toward the back of my head. The monitor went black. All 12 screens were dark now, reflecting nothing, showing nothing. The store felt different in the sudden absence of that electronic glow. Darker, more confined. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer than before, their buzz growing louder, more aggressive, like angry insects trapped in the fixtures. I heard a sound from aisle 7. A wet, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the tile floor. Then the same sound from aisle 3, from the stockroom, from everywhere at once. Getting closer, the lights began to flicker. Not all at once, but in sequence, starting at the back of the store and moving forward. Each aisle going dark for a moment before humming back to life. And in those brief moments of darkness, I could see them. The figures, standing in the aisles, visible only when the lights were off, vanishing the moment illumination returned. They were getting closer with each flicker, moving forward in the darkness, frozen when the lights came on. A horrifying game of red light, green light, except I was the only one playing, and losing meant something I couldn't let myself think about. I ran for the front door, grabbed the handle and pulled. Locked, but I hadn't locked it. I never locked it during my shift in case someone needed to get in for an emergency. I pulled again, harder, panic flooding my system. The door wouldn't budge. The lights flickered again, and when they came back on, there were wet footprints on the floor, leading from every aisle, converging on the front counter, on me. But the footprints weren't from outside. They were appearing as I watched, materializing out of nowhere, like invisible feet walking across the tile, leaving behind dark, oily residue that smelled like copper and rot. The security monitors suddenly blazed back to life, all 12 screens showing the same image. The front counter, me, standing by the door, trying to escape. And behind me, on every single monitor, dozens of those figures crowding the store, pressed together, all facing my direction. I could feel them now, a cold presence surrounding me, pressing in from all sides. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last minute. My breath came out in visible clouds. The wet dragging sounds were everywhere, echoing off the walls, impossible to locate, impossible to escape. This was it. This was how Carl Hendricks had disappeared. This was what happened in the Hollow Creek Market after midnight. This was the truth that nobody talked about, the secret that this town kept buried because acknowledging it meant accepting that something impossible was real. The lights went out completely. In the absolute darkness, I could finally see them clearly. Dozens of figures surrounding me, their featureless faces turned in my direction, their bodies radiating that terrible cold. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there in a circle, watching, waiting for something. Then one of them reached out and touched my shoulder. The lights came back on. I was alone. The store was empty. The monitors showed normal footage of empty aisles. The footprints were gone. Everything was exactly as it should be. Like nothing had happened. Like the last hour had been some kind of fever dream. Except my shoulder burned where that thing had touched me. And when I looked down, there was a dark handprint on my shirt. Oily and black and cold. I quit that night. Walked out at 3 in the morning, leaving the door unlocked, the lights on, the register unattended. I didn't care. I drove straight home and spent the rest of the night sitting in my truck with all the lights on, too afraid to close my eyes. The next morning, the owner called me, asked why I abandoned my shift. I tried to explain, tried to tell him about the monitors and the figures and the impossible horror of what I experienced. He listened in silence, then said something that made my blood run cold. He said every night shift employee experiences it eventually. He said Carl Hendricks had experienced it too, had called him that night, terrified, describing the same things I'd seen. He said Carl went back inside the store to wait for help, and that was the last anyone ever heard from him. He asked if I touched any of them, if they touched me. I looked down at the black handprint on my shoulder, still visible, still cold. He hung up. That was 3 weeks ago. The handprint hasn't faded. It's spreading slowly, growing larger each day, crawling across my skin like a stain. And every night when I close my eyes, I can see those monitors. I can see myself on those screens, sitting in my house, trying to sleep. And I can see them standing behind me, just like they stood in the store, watching and waiting. They were always on camera. They were always watching. And once they touch you, You were never really alone again. Story 9. A voice on the intercom. I'm still trying to understand what happened that night. My therapist says I should talk about it. So here I am, confessing this terrifying experience to anyone who will listen. But I am warning you right now. Once you hear this, you'll never look at a gas station the same way again. You'll hear a voice on an intercom in some abandoned corner of America, and you'll remember this story. You'll remember what I am about to tell you, and you'll know that some places aren't what they seem. My name is David Brennan. I am a 48-year-old accountant from Toledo, Ohio. I drive through rural America on business trips. I'm ordinary. I follow the speed limit. I don't to take risks. I am exactly the kind of person you expect to walk into a nightmare and somehow survive it. It was late November when I took the shortcut through western Kansas. I was driving back from a client meeting in Colorado, and I wanted to avoid the interstate traffic. The highway I chose was Route 54, a long, straight ribbon of asphalt cutting through endless prairie. The landscape was hypnotic, just wheat fields and sky for miles and miles. It was the kind of drive that makes you feel small, the kind of drive that makes you aware of how alone you really are. I'd been driving for 7 hours when I saw the gas station. There's nothing around it for 40 miles in any direction. No town, no houses, no signs of civilization except a single pump and a small building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1960s. The sign read, Martin S. Auto Stop, in faded red letters. The paint was peeling. The windows were dark, but the pumps looked new, shiny, recently installed. That's what caught my attention. Why would someone install brand new pumps at a place like this? There was no logical reason. The station shouldn't exist here. The economics made no sense. Yet there it was, waiting at the edge of the darkening prairie as the sun dropped toward the horizon. My gas tank was at a quarter full. I had maybe 60 miles before I hit the next town. The smart thing would have been to wait. The unsettling thing was that I felt drawn to this place. Not scared yet, just unsettled. The kind of feeling you get when something is wrong, but you can't quite identify what it is. I pulled in. The pumps were arranged in a perfect rectangle. 4 of them, spaced equidistant from each other. The tarmac was immaculate. No debris, no dirt, no weathering. The building sat 30 feet away, a small brick structure with a single window and a dark door. No lights were on inside. No signs indicating it was open, but the pumps were gleaming under the last rays of sunlight. I pulled up to pump 3. I got out of my car. The wind was cold and strong, coming down from the north. It carried the smell of dead grass and something else. Something chemical, something that made my nose wrinkle. The sky was turning orange and purple, and the shadows were growing longer. The kind of light that makes everything look sinister and wrong. I opened the fuel door. The pump in front of me looked sophisticated. Touchscreen, card reader, temperature display, everything state-of-the-art, which made the surrounding desolation even more unsettling. Modern technology in the middle of nowhere, with no one around to operate it. No one around for miles. I reached for my credit card. That's when I heard it. A voice on the intercom. Pump 3. Not a question. A statement. No one was there to say it. The voice came from a speaker mounted on the pump itself. And it was calm and measured and utterly impossible because there was no one in that building. I could see through the window. The interior was dark and empty. No person. No movement. Nothing. My hand froze. The voice had been male. Older. Deliberately calm in a way that suggested someone trying very hard not to sound scared. But why would anyone sound scared about announcing a pump number? I looked around the gas station. The prairie stretched out in every direction, empty and golden in the fading light. No other cars, no other people, just me and the wind and that impossible voice that had come from nowhere. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, trying to rationalize what I heard. A recording, probably. Automated message triggered by my presence. Some kind of sensor system. But the voice had sounded too human, too aware, too present. The intercom crackled again. This time, there was static. The kind of static you hear when someone is trying to speak through a broken system. Then the voice came through again, and this time it sounded different. Strained, like someone speaking through pain. Done, to use pump 3. Moved to pump 1. I looked at pump 1. It was 20 feet away, closer to the building. Something about being told to move made the hair on my neck stand up. The creepy feeling intensified. The kind of fear that comes from the unknown. I couldn't explain why I was frightened, but every instinct was screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. I got back in my car without putting any gas in. My heart was beating fast. My hands felt shaky. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe the station manager had a sense of humor. Maybe he liked scaring customers. But there was no one there. I knew that. I could feel that absence. The building was empty in a way that felt deliberate and hungry. I should have driven away. I put the car in reverse and pulled away from pump 3. I was heading toward the exit when the voice came back on the intercom. This time, it wasn't too calm. This time, it sounded desperate. Come inside, please. You need to come inside right now. The pleading in that voice made my skin crawl. It was the voice of someone begging for help. Someone in genuine distress. Someone who was terrified and trying to hide it behind professional courtesy. I did not go inside. Instead, I drove. Not carefully, not following any particular route. I just pointed my car toward the highway and drove away from that gas station as fast as I could manage. In my rearview mirror, I watched the pumps recede. The building grew smaller. The prairie swallowed everything. I made it to the next town, a place called Satanta with a population barely over 1,000. I pulled into a normal gas station. Lights on, attendants working, cars parked outside. Reality, normal life, witnesses. I filled my tank and tried to calm down. The cashier was a young woman with tired eyes. I asked her about Martin. His auto stop. She stopped what she was doing. Her entire body went tense. She asked me where I heard about that place. I told her I'd seen a sign. She didn't believe me. She told me there was no gas station in that direction. Nothing for 80 miles except prairie and old ranch roads. I described it to her. The pumps, the building, the voice on the intercom. She went pale. She walked to the back of the store and got her manager. An older man with a face like weathered leather. I repeated my story. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he told me something that made my blood turn cold. 3 people had gone missing from that route in the last 5 years. Drivers. Every single one had been driving that stretch of Route 54. Every single one had stopped at a gas station that didn't exist on any official records or maps. Their cars were later found abandoned on the prairie, keys in the ignition, driver doors open. No bodies, no sign of struggle, just empty vehicles pointing in random directions, as if the drivers had simply gotten out and started walking into the darkness. He told me that locals avoided that area. That sometimes, travelers reported seeing a building at the edge of the prairie that vanished when they blinked. That sometimes, dispatch calls came through on local emergency frequencies with a single message repeated over and over. Pump 3. Pump 3. Pump 3. But here, it's the thing that made this horrifying. Here, it's the part that still keeps me awake at night. He showed me something on his computer. Security footage from a highway camera located about 15 miles north of where that station was supposedly located. The footage was grainy and intermittent, but it showed something that made my entire body go numb. The footage showed my car, parked at that gas station, in the same position I left it. But the timestamp showed it was taken 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks before I ever went to that location. And when I looked closer, when the camera angle shifted, I could see someone standing at pump 3. Just standing there, still as a statue, looking down at the pump. A figure in dark clothing, facing away from the camera, completely motionless. The man told me he examined every frame of that footage over 100 times. The figure never moved. Not once. In hours of footage, spanning multiple weather conditions and times of day, that figure stood at pump 3 without changing position. Like it was waiting, like it was patient, like it could wait forever. I asked him if he knew who it was. He said that the last missing person reported, a woman named Sarah Chen from Kansas City. She'd been driving that same stretch of road. Her photograph matched the figure in the footage. Her car was found abandoned near that exact location. She disappeared 6 months ago. I drove straight through the night to get back to Ohio. I didn't. She stopped. I didn't. She sleep. The voice on that intercom kept playing in my head. The desperation in it. The plea for help. The impossible fact that someone had been calling my name through a speaker at a gas station that didn't exist. But here is what really haunts me. Here is the part that I can explain. When I got home, I found something I hadn't seen before. A photograph in my jacket pocket. A Polaroid. I done a camera. I never take pictures. I have no idea how this photo got there. It shows me standing at pump 3. The photo is old, yellowed with age, like it was taken decades ago. In it, I'm wearing clothes I own now. Clothes I was wearing that day. I am standing perfectly still, facing away from the camera, just like that figure in the highway footage. And I am smiling. My head is turned just enough that I can see my profile. And I'm smiling like I know something wonderful. Like I'm finally where I am supposed to be. I've never been to that location before that day. That should be impossible. Last week, I checked my credit card statement. There was a charge on it from Martin's Auto Stop, dated 3 weeks before my trip, for exactly $40.87. A full tank of gas from a location I'd never been to on a date I couldn't explain. The creepy truth is starting to settle into my mind. The terrifying realization that there are places in America that exist outside normal time. Places where something is waiting. Places where voices call through intercoms to people who are yet to arrive. Places where you might have already been, even if you've never driven there. The most horrifying part? I'm planning another drive through Kansas. Not because I want to, because I feel called back. Because something is waiting for me at Pump 3, and with each passing day, the pull gets stronger. The urge becomes more intense. I find myself checking weather reports for western Kansas, mapping out the exact route, noting that my fuel tank is getting low, and sometimes, late at night, I hear static, just static, coming from nowhere, and underneath it, I hear breathing. Someone's breath, steady and patient and hopeful, waiting for me to make the decision to come back. The voice on that intercom is still calling, and I am beginning to think that when I finally answer, I'll finally understand why my car was already there, why I was already smiling, why that place exists in multiple times at once, collecting drivers who thought they were in control of their own journeys. Some places don't. They let you leave. They just let you think you have. And Pump 3 is always waiting for the next arrival of someone who has already been there all along. Story 10. Station he couldn't. You find again the gas station saved my life at 2:30 in the morning. And 3 days later, it didn't exist. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not crazy. I am a logistics manager for a commercial trucking company in Tennessee. 47 years old, married 22 years, 2 kids in college. I deal with facts, spreadsheets, delivery schedules. The guy who notices when numbers dawn to add up. So when I tell you what happened on Route 39 outside of Millbrook, when I tell you about the station that shouldn't have been there, I need you to believe that I know how insane this sounds. It was October when I took that drive. Company audit in Memphis. Routine trip I'd made a dozen times before. The highway stretched out empty and dark, cutting through miles of Tennessee backwoods. My headlights were the only light for miles. Just me and the endless road and the kind of darkness that feels alive. The kind that presses against your windows and makes you check your mirrors even though you know nothing is there. My gas tank was reading a quarter full. Plenty to make it to the next town. But then my check engine light flickered on. Once, twice, then stayed lit. The engine started making this horrible knocking sound, metal on metal, like something was tearing itself apart under the hood. My temperature gauge shot into the red zone. I had maybe 5 minutes before the whole engine seized up and left me stranded in the middle of nowhere. That is when I saw it. The gas station appeared around a curve like a mirage, brilliant fluorescent lights cutting through the darkness. A small place, old-fashioned, the kind with 2 pumps and a little convenience store attached. The sign above the canopy read, "Last Stop," in red neon letters that flickered and buzzed. I could hear that buzz even through my closed windows, could feel it in my teeth. I pulled in, the engine knocking worse now, steam starting to pour from under the hood. The moment I cut the ignition, the car shuddered and died. Perfect timing. Too perfect, but I was too relieved to question it. The gas station looked like it had been pulled straight from 1985. Everything about it was wrong for 2024. The pumps were ancient, with mechanical number wheels instead of digital displays. The price sign advertised gas at 99 cents a gallon. The windows of the convenience store glowed with warm yellow light, but I couldn't see anyone inside. What I could see were the other cars. 6 of them, parked in the lot at odd angles like their drivers had just abandoned them in a hurry. A minivan with a child's car seat visible in the back. A Honda Civic with a college sticker on the bumper. A pickup truck with Tennessee plates. All of them looked relatively new. Nothing older than 5 or 6 years. All of them sitting empty in this ancient gas station in the middle of the night. The scary thing wasn't that they were there, it was how they were parked. Not lined up neat and orderly. Not pulled up to the building or near the pumps. Just scattered across the lot like someone had dropped them from the sky and they landed wherever. like whoever had been driving them had stopped right where they were and walked away. I got out of my car slowly. The October air was cold enough to see my breath, but something felt wrong about the temperature. It wasn't natural cold. It was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you think about graves and winter and things that don't belong in the world of the living. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that constant drone that sets your nerves on edge. The door to the convenience store was propped open with a brick. Not locked, not closed, just open to the night, inviting me in. I should have gotten back in my car and called for a tow truck. But my phone had no signal, 0 bars, and my car was dead. And it was the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere, and this was the only light and warmth for miles. I walked toward that open door like a moth to flame, like every horror movie victim you ever yelled at through your TV screen. Because sometimes you have a choice. Sometimes the creepy gas station in the woods is your only option. The inside was immaculate, shelves stocked with snacks and drinks, all organized perfectly. A coffee maker in the corner with fresh coffee brewing. I could smell it, rich and dark. The register sat unattended on the counter, the little display reading 00. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything look flat and surreal. But here is what made my skin crawl. Everything in that store was old. The candy bars had wrappers I remembered from my childhood. The soda brands were ones that hadn't existed in decades. Even the magazine rack displayed publications from the 80s. Their covers faded and yellowed, but arranged like they'd just been delivered that morning. And there was nobody there. Not behind the counter, not stocking shelves, not anywhere. Just that eerie silence broken only by the hum of the lights and the gurgle of the coffee maker. I called out. My voice echoed strangely in the small space, like the walls were absorbing the sound wrong. No answer. I tried again, louder this time. Nothing. Just that disturbing, unnatural quiet. That's when I noticed the wall behind the counter. It was covered in Polaroid photographs, hundreds of them, tacked up in neat rows that stretched from floor to ceiling. I walked closer, my heart started to hammer in my chest. Each photograph showed a person standing in front of the gas station. Different people, different clothes, different decades judging by the styles. But they all had the same expression. Not smiling, not frowning, just blank, empty, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that made them human. I recognized one of the cars in the photos. The Honda Civic with the college sticker. In the picture, a young woman stood next to it, blonde hair, maybe 22 years old. That same blank expression on her face. The date stamp in the corner of the Polaroid read 3 days ago. 3 days ago, that car was still sitting in the parking lot outside. My hands started shaking. I backed away from the counter, and that is when I saw the logbook. It sat next to the register, bound in cracked leather, thick with yellowed pages. The kind of book that shouldn't exist in the age of computers and digital records. My name for logic and order made me pick it up, made me open it to the most recent page. The entries were written in different handwriting, like different people had made them. Each entry had a date, a name, a license plate number, and a single line of text. I scanned the recent ones, my eyes catching on familiar details. The Honda Civic, the minivan, the pickup truck, all the vehicles sitting outside, all dated within the last 2 weeks. And next to each entry, that same chilling phrase, accepted the offer. What offer? What the hell did that mean? I flipped backward through the pages, dozens of entries, hundreds, going back decades, 1995, 1987, 1976, on and on. Thousands of names and dates, all with that same notation. Accepted the offer. The oldest entries were from 1952. Over 70 years of people stopping at this station and accepting some mysterious offer. A shadow moved outside the window. I snapped my head up, heart in my throat, and saw a figure standing by the pumps. Tall, impossibly thin, wearing what looked like a gas station attendant uniform from the 50s. But something was horrifyingly wrong with its proportions. The arms were too long, hanging past its knees. The head tilted at an angle that would break a human neck. It turned toward the window, toward me, and even though I couldn't see its face clearly through the glass, I felt its attention lock onto me like a physical weight. Cold and ancient and hungry, I dropped the logbook and ran, burst out the door into the parking lot, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My car was dead, but I had to try. I yanked open this door, threw myself inside, and turned the key with trembling fingers. The engine roared to life, purring like it had never been sick at all. The temperature gauge read normal. The check engine light was off. Everything was fine. Perfectly, impossibly fine. I didn't question it. I threw the car into reverse and peeled out of that parking lot, gravel spraying. In my rearview mirror, I saw that figure still standing by the pumps, watching me go. It didn't chase, didn't move, just stood there in that pool of fluorescent light, growing smaller and smaller as I raced away into the darkness. I drove for 2 hours straight, didn't stop until I hit a well-lit truck stop on the interstate with dozens of other vehicles and people and noise and life. I sat in the parking lot until the sun came up, too terrified to close my eyes, too wired to sleep. When dawn finally broke, I convinced myself I imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, maybe carbon monoxide from the failing engine making me hallucinate. There had to be a rational explanation. 3 days later, I drove back during daylight. I needed to see it again. Needed to prove to myself it was real or that I was crazy, one or the other. I took Route 39, followed it exactly, watched for that curve where the station had appeared. It wasn't there. The lot was gone. Not abandoned, not closed down. Gone. Where the gas station should have been, there was nothing but dense forest. Old growth trees that looked like they'd been standing for 100 years. No clearing, no foundation, no trace that anything had ever been built there. I pulled over and walked into the woods, searching for any sign. Concrete, gravel, anything. Nothing, just trees and underbrush and the unsettling feeling that I was being watched. I asked around in Millbrook, the nearest town, showed people the location on a map, described the station. The old-timers got quiet when I mentioned Route 39. One guy, had to be 80 if he was a day, just shook his head and told me to let it go. Said his grandfather used to tell stories about a station that appeared to travelers in trouble. A place that offered to fix whatever was wrong with your car, with your life, with anything you needed. But the price wasn't the money. The price was everything else. Your future, your choices, your freedom. You accepted the offer, and you belonged to the station. Became part of whatever horror lived there, feeding on the desperate and the lost. I told him I'd escaped. That I'd be driven away. He looked at me with these sad, knowing eyes and said something that still makes my blood run cold. He said nobody escapes. He said the station lets you go when it's ready to collect. That was 4 months ago. At first, nothing happened. I went back to my normal life, tried to forget. But then the dream started. Every night, I'm standing in that parking lot. The figure by the pumps is calling to me without words, without sound. Just this pull, this need to go back, to finish what I started. And here is the thing that terrifies me most. Yesterday, my check engine light came on again. Same knocking sound, same overheating. But when I took it to my mechanic, he couldn't find anything wrong. Said the engine was in perfect condition. Better than perfect. Better than it should be after 150,000 miles. It's happening more often now. The light comes on every few days. The knocking gets louder. My car is trying to die, trying to leave me stranded. And I know, with a certainty that wakes me up screaming, that next time it happens, I'll see those lights again. That station will be waiting on Route 39, exactly where I need it to be. And this time, when that figure offers to help, when it offers to fix everything that is wrong, I don't know if I'll be strong enough to refuse. Because the thing about the last stop is that it knows what you need. It knows when you are desperate and alone and out of options. And it's always there, just waiting in the darkness, ready to make you an offer you can refuse. I'm telling you this as a warning. If you be ever driving through Tennessee late at night, if your car breaks down on Route 39, if you see lights that shouldn't be there, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't accept any help, no matter how desperate you are. Because some deals can be broken. Some debts can be paid. And some stations don't let you leave until they're done with you. I'm still driving. Still running. But my check engine light just came on again. And this time, it won to turn off. These stories don't resolve everything. And they're not meant to. Midnight Whispers Stories is built as a continuous experience, not individual episodes. When you subscribe, you don't just get another video. You get ongoing access to the same atmosphere, new long-form stories every day, and a place to return when you want immersion without interruption. Subscribe and stay with the series.